U redu, svi smo stigli, čujemo se dobro. Evo, meni je pripala ta čast da otvorimo da vodimo ovu konferenciju, odnosno ovaj panel Izazovi zatvorene Evrope. Skratit ću vreme, pošto nemamo dovoljno vremena. Sa nama su danas njihove ekscelencije, gospodin Tomas Šib, ambasador Nemačke, njegova ekscelencija Raul Bartolome Molina, ambasador Kraljevine Španije, njegova ekscelencija Nj.E, ambasador Finske u Srbiji, Rebeka Fabrici, zamjenica britanske ambasadorke u Beogradu i Dejana Kostadinova, direktorka UNICEF-a u Srbiji. Nastavit ćemo sad, naravno, na engleskom. We'll proceed in English now. We are at the beginning of this conference and we already don't have enough time as we planned, so we should be a little bit brief on these topics. So I will not spare the time more. For the beginning, I have the same questions for EU member state ambassadors, Mr. Šib, Molina and Ladervirta. The closure of Europe due to the coronavirus pandemic is a kind of a solidarity test for the European Union. It seems that Brussels did not react in organized and adequate manner at first, and individual problems of the member states became obvious. Citizens of certain countries complained about the Brussels administration, but also about misunderstanding and selfishness of their European neighbors at a time when they needed help. How much has that harmed unified European policy? Mr. Šib. Green.
Hello, yes, and thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for the question. To be honest, I thought I thought the discussion, so to say, had developed much further. But thanks for the question anyway. I think what is important to say that the corona pandemic is really posing an unprecedented challenge on a global scale. And it was pretty overwhelming, I think, for almost everybody, including the European Union. And I think from the German perspective, it was from the, let's say, the government's perspective, it was very difficult, but also important to keep a certain balance. Of course, first of all, it was about protecting the population, the health of the people. And secondly, of course, it became clear quickly that this pandemic would have severe economic consequences. And thirdly, it was also important, so to say, to only deploy proportionate measures, not to curtail individual freedoms too much, extensively. So you had to keep this very fragile kind of balance, and it's still not over. So the pandemic is clearly with us. All in all, I would say, so far we have passed the test quite well. We managed, and the EU managed to. It's a learning organism, so to say. We constantly adapted our response. We did this at the national level. We did it at the European level. And talking about solidarity, in hindsight, I think it's fair to say that the European Union did act pretty quickly, given the difficult circumstances. And when it comes to the Western Balkans, only after a couple of weeks, I think, the EU deployed and supported or employed humanitarian measures. Among others, the EU financed flights to bring protective material, equipment to Serbia. Then in May, the EU adopted a package of 3.3 billion euros And then now, very recently, and this is what we welcome very much, the EU managed to adopt this so-called economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans with an amount of up to 9 billion euros. But again, it's, well, it was difficult, is difficult, but all in all, I would say the European response was, was quite impressive, adequate, but the challenge, of course, is huge and remains huge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Molina, common people in Spain or Italy complained about their neighbors that they don't want to help them. We heard that at the beginning of this year. How do you see this problem from your perspective?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. But I must say that I mostly agree with what Tomas Šib, the German ambassador, said, my colleague here said. I think that it was an unprecedented situation, very difficult to tackle with for each country that has been affected, that is almost every country in the world. And at the beginning, the response was very, very difficult, and it was divided according to the countries, and very difficult. In Spain, it was really difficult. It was one of the first and most affected countries in Europe. Then it spread to other countries, and it was really difficult. And obviously, yes, people complained about some lack of cooperation from other European countries and for the European Union. But I think that changed quickly, and the European Union responded fairly well to that. And it has, in fact, I think that reinforced the European Union in the end, because we've seen the recovery fund, the recovery plan that is really unprecedented in the European Union. Even it has reinforced some unifying policies in the European Union for the first time. The response to this crisis, it's a different crisis, is completely different from the response we had to the economic crisis of 2008. And contrary to that crisis, there have been policies taken by the European Union, by the Commission and by the European Council and the Council of Ministers that reinforce the union between the member states, the cooperations between them. So I think that it's a huge step forward, European Union, contrary to what some people think. And we will see that in the future, because this recovery fund, these agreements inside the European Union for stronger cooperation will leave a footprint for the future integration. So we've been learning, we've been doing things step by step and trying to answer to an unprecedented challenge. And I think that in the end, but we're still seeing it, we will see it in the next months, for the whole next year, I think, we will see that in the end, the response the European Union gave to this pandemic was a clear response, and that it will help for a further integration in the future. Thank you.
What do you think about this from the perspective of a more organized and disciplined country in the European Union, definitely?
Well, I don't know about that, but anyway, I think I'm pretty much along the same lines as my colleagues have already said. I think the problem at the beginning was that many of the actions required belong to the areas of national competence, like healthcare and also justice and home affairs. And actually, the Commission and also the Croatian and German presidencies of the Council of the EU have been very active in their own areas and also successful in many ways. And so there have been problems certainly at the beginning, but I think this crisis has also given impetus to develop the EU in areas which are relevant for better crisis responsiveness. So I think the EU that will emerge from this crisis will be slightly different, with more willingness to extend union competence and cooperation to areas that have been off limits so far.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fabrici. It seems that in the moments when the epidemic broke out and when everyone had to focus on their backyard, practically in one day solidarity between states and people simply disappeared, it seems. In later months the situation improved, but at the beginning it was not a case. To what extent has coronavirus epidemic irreversibly changed the European and world political scene?
Hi, thank you for the question. I mean, I have to say it doesn't seem like that to me. I've heard people say this, but I really don't recognize this world where solidarity disappeared. I mean, as my colleagues have said, this was unprecedented in the scale and also the nature of the crisis. A pandemic, it's global, but it's also local because it affects different places in different ways. So, for example, in the UK, we've seen a response which has been different in Scotland, Wales, and England, different in different cities according to the state of the pandemic, and we've seen that around the world as well. But this question about solidarity, I mean, at the beginning when the issue emerged in China, many countries, including mine, supported China and helped them. They also reciprocated when they were able. The European Union in Serbia came with very strong assistance, not my job to talk about the EU, but this very sustained and significant assistance, even when the situation in some of the countries of the EU was extremely difficult. So I think that this solidarity, I think we've really seen it. But we're also carrying on seeing it now, because now we have programs like COVAX, which I think has 189 countries have signed up for COVAX. So this is a proper global initiative. And certainly my country has made a very significant donations to COVAX. And we're also with vaccines. Obviously vaccines are kind of the theme of the moment. We are seeing multiple, there are many, many, many vaccines in development and at late stages or even authorized now for use. Even in the UK now, we're already rolling out a vaccine program with the Pfizer vaccine. This is also international cooperation between businesses and governments to really accelerate and make sure that, that we tackle this problem for the benefit of everybody around the world. So I think, in terms of, what we may see as sustained trends, as everybody has been saying this morning, it's hard to say, and I feel now I want to read back what you said about the world in 2020 as well in last year's magazine. It's always difficult to foresee what's going to happen. But obviously these changes have been enormous and unprecedented, and we're also going to see, the pandemic is continuing. Although we have vaccines, it's going to continue through next year while these vaccines are rolled out. But of course this has changed some political trends domestically in countries around the world beyond Europe. If we think particularly of big countries with elections this year, it's been important and significant politically in many places. And I think also, this point about pandemic planning, preparedness, and an accent on health policy, we're clearly going to see a big emphasis on that worldwide.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kostadinova. 75 years ago, UNICEF was founded in an effort to secure the fate of Europe's children. UNICEF is uniquely positioned among humanitarian and development agencies to respond not only to needs of children affected by emergencies, but also to work for a better future for all children. How do you look at solidarity in the context of COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Mr. Despotović, and thank you for bringing the question of solidarity, which is a question of values, in fact, to this debate for COVID. Indeed, UNICEF has responded to some of the biggest crises over the last 70 years. We've been at the front line of every pandemic, epidemic, every conflict and every crisis since the Second World War. But 1 year after the COVID-19 pandemic began, we can say that this is probably the most complex one that we've ever seen. Trying to cope with the immediate and devastating effects of the pandemic, the countries imposed unprecedented measures at the beginning, including closure of borders. But the virus doesn't know borders, and it affects all the countries. So we must remain united in our humanity. The fight against this global pandemic requires international cooperation and solidarity. all over the world we have seen a lot of heartwarming acts of solidarity, resilience, inventiveness and kindness. And I agree with my colleague that COVAX is one of these acts of solidarity. But we have also seen concerning signs of stigma, of misinformation, of extreme market conditions, including aggressive buying of the most needed supplies and medical equipment. And at the end of the day, politicization of the pandemic crisis. So governments all around the world have mobilized billions of dollars to support their economies. But there is another impending and devastating loss that will occur if we do not act now. And this is the lost generation of children. And this loss will be much more dangerous than the economic status now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šib. The autumn report of the German Institute stated that in the fall, in GDP in Germany this year will be even bigger than it was thought this spring, and that it will amount to as much as 5.4%. Despite that, some economists say that Germany will get out of these problems relatively well. So do you share their optimism?
Thank you for the question. I think it's very difficult to make any forecasts. I would say in principle we share this cautious optimism, but at the same time I think we are again in the midst of another wave of the corona pandemic, and I think it's at this stage very difficult to quantify what this will mean, how severe the impact will be. What I can do is quote the German Council of Economic Experts in their annual report from 11th of November. They say that, they refer to the fact that this corona pandemic has caused one of the most severe repercussions in the post-war era. And they expect a decline this year of about 5+% and next year, so they do expect a recovery amounting to about 3.7%. So, but again, we have to see. I mean, we have also in Germany, we have adopted impressive support packages. As my Spanish colleague said, we managed during the German presidency to agree and adopt a historic package, including a recovery fund amounting to 750 billion euros. And of course now what is important to spend this money wisely, intelligently. Looking at the German economy, I think what was interesting is that digitalization, in a way, somehow helped mitigate the immediate impact. At the same time, it also became clear that in many areas there are huge deficits when it comes to digitalization, health sector, for example, education. So the crisis also in a way might help now put a spotlight on those areas which needs more attention, also in view of a future recovery. So let's see. But all in all, I would say with all the help packages now adopted, we are cautiously optimistic that the recovery will come. And my last word, of course, it's a silver lining that we do have vaccines now. In the UK, for example, this process has already started, the vaccination process, and we do hope that in the EU this process is also going to start as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molina. Spain's economy has seen its biggest decline since 1970. Statistics say that in the second quarter of this year, the Spanish economy fell by 21.5% compared to the same period last year. What are the forecasts for next year, and are you optimistic?
Okay, thank you. In fact, it was the biggest decline not since 1970, it's the biggest decline since the end of the Civil War in 1939. So it's even worse than what you said.
It's even worse.
But in fact, well, the Spanish economy was hugely affected by the pandemics because its economy, in fact, very open to the European economy and to the world, and we are also very dependent on tourism and that, so we were more affected than other countries. Anyway, in the third quarter of this year, the Spanish economy made a bond, and it recovered by, in fact, 16.7%. But probably for the fourth quarter, the decline will be again important. But it is very, very difficult to say what will happen. As my German colleague said, we are just waiting for the vaccination, and we are relatively optimistic that next year will be a much better year and a recovery will take place, even if it will take some years to get back to the normal situation we had previous to the pandemic. Anyway, for these years, the forecasts of the government is a decline of the J.E for about 11.2% in the whole year. It's more or less the same thing that international financial institutions think. For example, the OECD, it says that it will be 11.6, and the European Commission's 12.4 for the forecast for this year of decline. And the government is optimistic for the next year. It forecasts a growth next year of a little bit more than 7%, but all the international institutions talk about 5%, 5.5%. So we'll see. It's very, very difficult in this moment that we are still in the midst of the pandemic to say what will happen and what the pace of the recovery will be. But anyway, I think recovery will take place as soon as possible, and we all hope that this vaccination process that will begin in the European Union, I think mostly in January, will help to be back to a situation that will be much more normal than the one we are living now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladovirta. Finland is one of the countries that copes best with the coronavirus pandemic, and it has the lowest infection rate in Europe. How much did such a discipline contribute to the preservation of the economy?
Well, yeah, one of the lowest rates. I think we have now about 112 cases per 100,000 people per 2 weeks, which I think is the 5th lowest in Europe presently. So we do have problems, but I think the government measures have affected the situation so that it is fairly positive in the sense that it's now estimated that our GNP will drop only by 3 or 4% this year, which is of course relatively good if the EU average is about 7.4 or so. And I think worrying of course is that our exports have dropped by something like 13% and export of services especially by almost 1/3. But what is positive is of course also that it seems presently that our public debt will of course rise from about 59% to 70%, but it's actually less than what was initially predicted. So now it seems that we only need half of what we estimated in the spring as new debt. So we have suffered also, and as Finland mostly produces investment goods, this international crisis tend to hit us with a delay. So therefore it's maybe a bit early to say what the final bill will be actually.
You were lucky you had head start. So, Mrs. Fabrici, after the first lockdown, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was optimistic when it comes to recovery of the British economy, but unfortunately lockdown happened again. However, the first mass vaccination world gives Great Britain a significant advantage in the world economic race. What are your expectations about that?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, we're obviously all very excited about the vaccine and for the whole world, not just for the UK. So we've been the first to start with the rollout, but I hope that that will happen very soon in other countries as well, because even though we can't imagine that that's going to put an end to the pandemic in the next couple of months, you know, we're still going to have to work with this situation for a while. It makes it a lot easier for us when we can see that, you know, an improvement now on the horizon. So I think that's really, really fantastic. I think we're not looking at this as a race exactly. You know, of course, you know, we need other countries to flourish economically in order for all of us to flourish. So it's important that we try to, you know, we come back from this pandemic all around the world so that we can all continue cooperating in the global economy. For the UK, it's definitely been a big shock to the economy. I think our economy is around 9% smaller now than it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So now growing again, but obviously it's going to be at least, I think it's foreseen to be around 2 years from now that we should be back at the pre-pandemic level. So that's been a big shock. Our government has also invested very heavily in measures to support the economy during this period. So I think it's around £280 billion has been spent to keep people in employment, paying people's wages while they were unable to work. A very big investment in the health service, of course, to manage the pandemic. And grants and loans to businesses and so on. We've also, because we've now been learning, I think as Kimo said, you know, it's very early to be able to say things clearly about the pandemic. I think one member of the Serbian crisis group said to me, you know, there are still people spending their whole career researching the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. You know, so we don't know everything yet, but of course we're trying to adapt as we go along. And certainly in terms of lockdowns, we've made some adaptations, trying to have lockdowns which also permit economic activity to continue while targeting the, you know, the most difficult areas. And also remembering, I mean, I'm really, you know, this is really important what Diana was talking about as well, that we have to also think about the other impacts of the pandemic. You know, children, especially lower income families and so on, where they perhaps don't have as much support, not going to school for months and months, can have a permanent scar in a whole generation. So the lockdowns, you know, we've tried to adapt to make sure that we can come back from the pandemic in a healthy way.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Kostadinova, when common people and countries don't have money, what was the response of the donors to UNICEF appeal and how it affects your work at mandate?
UNICEF has been responding to the virus since the very beginning. We'll work in close collaboration with the World Health Organization, with the governments and with all the stakeholders in order to stop the transmission of the virus and to minimize the socio-economic effects of the pandemic. We receive a lot of contribution at global level, and this allows UNICEF to respond rapidly and strategically and to deliver assistance where it was much needed. More than $1.41 billion US had been received thanks to the contribution of the Global Partnership for Education, United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, private sector, World Bank, European Union. As an organization funded entirely by voluntary donations, UNICEF relies on the support from the private sector as a core source for income. And I should admit that I'm impressed with the private sector response in Serbia to the coronavirus pandemic. The Serbian business leaders took responsibility and demonstrated a strong leadership role towards their employees, but also towards the community as a whole. And this makes me feel optimistic because there are much more challenges ahead. According to the latest UNICEF Research Center Innocentes report, child poverty will remain above pre-COVID levels for up to 5 years in the high-income countries. We should be aware that how much money are spent in response to the crisis matters. High-income countries are spending historic amounts of money. About 8% of the global GDP was allocated to the COVID response from February since July, during the first wave. But only 2% of this vast amount of money was earmarked for child-specific social policies. I'm aware that many people are questioning the need of allocating money for children in the COVID response, bearing in mind that children are not the most affected, directly affected by the coronavirus pandemic. But let me explain why this is important. We expect a decline in both learning outcomes and health outcomes for children in the next years. And social expenditures have a crucial role in mitigating the effects of the crisis for children. For example, expenditures for social protection mitigate the child mortality rate. Expenditures for family policies mitigate a decline in learning outcomes. Education expenditures mitigate the proportion of youth not in education or employment. So we definitely need an approach of multiple interventions. And without extra efforts, all the governments are at risk of reversing recent progress towards the achieving sustainable development goals.
Thank you very much. We have only 10 minutes left because many people from all around the world are waiting for Skype addressing to this conference, so we need to be brief on this last circle of questions. So the same questions for Mr. Šib, Mr. Molina, and Mr. Ladevirta. The European Commission expects the European Union's economy to fall by 7.4% and expects it will take 2 years to return to the level before the pandemic. After the marathon negotiations, the leaders of the European Union concluded an agreement on a huge package of aid for economic recovery from the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic, worth as much as 750 billion euros. Is it enough? Simple question. Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Well, is it enough?
Is it enough?
We hope so, but first let me say, of course, we are happy that we managed to find an agreement, and apparently this package will be the largest stimulus package ever financed through the EU budget. So, and I think this is also an important signal. And the fact that the EU managed to, after indeed difficult negotiations, agree on this shows the willingness to tackle the crisis and to support the recovery. Now, again, we will see, but I think one thing is very important, that this recovery should be the right recovery. So an intelligent recovery and to take into account what we've learned during the crisis. And we think so, making Europe greener, more digital, and we think with the Green Deal proposed by the EU Commission, we have excellent guidelines of the orientation. So the Green Deal provides important orientation for a sustainable, intelligent, inclusive recovery. And last remark, this package which was adopted now in Brussels includes this economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans. And I think for this plan, kind of the same applies. Yeah, also this package, this stimulus should be spent in a wise, intelligent, sustainable way. But all in all, we are optimistic that it will be enough. Thank you.
It will be enough, Mr. Molina?
It's hard to say, of course. It's hard to say. But what I wanted to remark is the importance of the package. The fact that the package was adopted after very difficult negotiations and differences among the member states, with a lot of problems, but it was adopted. And it's an unprecedented package. It's the biggest package ever financed by EU budget, and it's also a smart package. And the important thing now is to use it accordingly to the guidelines we have. And digitalization, Green Deal, that is the lessons we've learned also from the pandemic. So we have to focus on that and to see how it works. But we are, I think in most countries of the European Union, optimistic about this package that, as I said at the beginning, it's absolutely unprecedented, and it will also reinforce the integration of the European Union. And that is, I think, very good news for Europe in general in this ordeal of the pandemic. So I think that we will be able to use it wisely, and I hope it will be enough, but God knows.
Do you agree with them? Is that allocation of that money planned properly?
Well, yeah, time will tell, but I think really, I think the first thing also, of course, is that this is not all of it. There's the regular budget of the EU or the multi-annual financial framework, 1,100 billion, plus the significant measures that the European Central Bank has taken. So I think now the key really is to use it wisely, as put before, and member states are, of course, now doing their national recovery plans together with the Commission. And I think this is really an excellent opportunity to boost green growth in Europe. So build new, not just repair the old. And I think if we succeed that, Europe will be in a much stronger position technologically, economically, socially, and also environmentally, and being then able to continue to act as a force for good in the world.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fabrici, the consolidation of the state budget and the recovery of the British economy go hand in hand with the end of Brexit. The trade agreement with the European Union is still unknown, and if no compromise is reached, it could additionally burden the British economy. How do you see this possible problem?
All right, thanks. I mean, it turns out those negotiations are still ongoing, so I think there's not very much that I could say about that exactly, but I would really just like to take the opportunity to really agree with what Kimo says about now, you know, we have an unprecedented situation of change now, so what we have to do now is to grow back in a better way, and this is a super top priority now for our government. We have the Climate Ambition Summit hosted by the UK with France and the UN on Saturday, and we have come out with very ambitious targets for reducing greenhouse emissions of 68% by 2030 compared to the 1990 level. And we are looking now at, we've issued some more strategies, 10-point plan for industry for green recovery. And I think now that we must take the opportunity now to use this period of change of disruption to put ourselves on a path that's really sustainable for the future.
Thank you very much, and let's conclude this panel with good thoughts, with hope. What are the plans for the future? How we rebuild and reimagine a world fit for every child? Is it possible?
I hope I will sound optimistic. In fact, this pandemic calls for transparent, science-based, and coordinated global response. Our actions today will shape the world we will live tomorrow. And we are here now. UNICEF is working in 192 countries and territories, working with the communities, working with the governments, working with all stakeholders in order to minimize the socio-economic impact of the pandemic on children. We work on several directions, implementing short-term and long-term measures, but if I have to summarize all these measures, I can say that we work with governments to ensure that child's rights will be embedded in the immediate COVID-19 response and long-term recovery planning. Every government and every stakeholder has a role to play in these efforts, because without coordinated global action, COVID-19 crisis can become a child's rights crisis. And the most meaningful way to prevent this is to ensure that children are built into the heart of the COVID-19 recovery response, which means that the second wave recovery response should be rethinked. Our response to the coronavirus disease must reimagine the world and make it fit for every child.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for this time. I'm sorry because of the time, but it's not our fault. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Hvala učesnicima našeg prvog panela. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mi nastavljamo dalje sa našom konferencijom.